a long time ago, in a galaxy far, far away. Dear Heavenly Father, we lay thee to rest this property that was once known as Star Wars. It was a property that gave people hope, something to actually look forward to, something to actually get them out of their beds in the morning, something that would, just prove that movies could not only be good, but great and awesome, and take them to far-off places that they'd never been before, that they never could have even dreamed of, even though most of them were filmed in locations on the planet Earth. In fact, all of them were filmed in locations on the planet Earth, so they kind of already did exist. But you know what I mean. The point was, it was to create an illusion, because that's what filmmaking is. Filmmaking is an illusion. You know that nothing that you're watching is actually real, but you're compelled by it and you're intrigued by it nonetheless, because you want to find out what's going on, because you want to get to the end of the rabbit hole, because unlike real life, where the only ending is death, movies actually have an ending that doesn't always end in the absolute sucky way that real life does. So with that being said, welcome to Talkin TV. This is your host, the Movie Nerd. I'm not going to use my real name today because by now all of you should be familiar with who I am. And sitting to my left, Chris.
To the right of Dominic Rizzi.
And to my right, we have a returning person from last week's excellent episode on the immediate new cult classic, Black Christmas, Pat Huber. Pat, glad to have you back.
Yeah, Dom, I want to add to your eulogy a little quickly.
Yes, please do.
Of Star Wars. As I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I take a look at my life and realize there's not much left because I've been blasting and laughing. Oh, wait, that's Gangster Paradise 6.
I was about to say, I'm like, I don't think that's the right thing you're reading.
We do not claim to own the rights.
Yeah, I know.
We don't want to get sued here.
I'm just saying that what Star Wars: The Rise of Skywalker really needed was a hip hop soundtrack. I think that would have made all the difference.
Definitely.
Well,
at this point, it probably would have.
If you want to jump in talking about the music, I recognized 3 new scores, and I gotta say, John Williams, unfortunately, to me, is losing it.
Yeah. Well, that's what happens when 90% of your score is fucking retread material, and you are literally like, you don't even have to make any new material, and then all of a sudden you do, and he's like, well, shit, none of the rest of the people are going to give a fuck. They already know most of Star Wars music. Fuck it. Why should I try? I'm like 89 years old, like worth $9 billion.
A few of the new themes and motifs that were introduced, they fell short to me.
Should we just probably establish like what it is we're actually talking about? Because I'm pretty sure it's outside of like one of Pat's reactions. Like, what are we talking about here? Is there even like a method and a format here that we're going based off of?
We're talking about Star Wars: The Rise of Skywalker.
Ugh, I can't believe we actually have to acknowledge that. I just want to call this Star Wars 9 and kind of like shove it in a file somewhere and forget that it exists. That's my thoughts on it. Oh, whoops, sorry if I was supposed to withhold that.
I think this is going to be my recurring thing, but I'm going to spoil it right off the bat.
Oh, please do. Please do. Let's just get this shit over with.
So
fuck all of you guys who like think that like you don't want to get spoiled on this, because trust me, we're doing you guys a favor here.
Yeah. So literally, wow. Skywalker rises.
Indeed.
Like
whether it's the right Skywalker, I have no idea.
Yeah, that's what this whole movie's about, is someone standing up. And we had to sit through 2.5 hours to watch that.
Well, so we can obviously all tear it apart and do what everyone else out there is doing, but I would like to, before we talk about what was wrong with it, and there's a lot to cover.
There was a lot of that.
Let's take the shorter segment, and like, was there anything we liked about the film? I mean, it couldn't be all terrible, he tells himself, right? I mean,
I like the audience that we were with.
Okay,
I agree with that.
So the theater experience,
the people that we were in front of, like, it was definitely a different kind of a Star Wars experience than the previous 4 that I've been to.
To me, it was an amazing theater experience because I've been very unapologetically like tooting the horn of wake up and smell the roses. We're getting force-fed the same thing over and over and over again, like, the endgame script that was The Last Jedi. And it's just like, I'm glad, because it finally feels like even the people who were there for like a night of entertainment realized that they were going to watch a film that wasn't going to meet their expectations. Like, it feels like the established theme of the audience, we were all sort of on the same page. We were going to watch a train wreck that we couldn't look away from.
And you know what the worst
which was nice to me.
You know what the worst part about that is that it would have been one thing if a majority of the people in that theater actually thought that going in the way that I did. I know for a fact that Pat did. Chris, I don't think you did necessarily going in. But I think it's also a fact of, like, people realize that halfway through, they were just watching a meandering train wreck. You know what watching this movie was like? Watching this movie was the equivalent to me of watching a car crash that was about to happen that you knew was going to happen, but there was nothing you could do to stop it. And it was just, you're just watching the two cars go by each other. And everything all of a sudden seems to slow down in the middle of all that craziness. And then it just speeds up and it's right back to fast forward again. That's what watching this movie felt like.
Yeah, I was gonna use that analogy as well, and I think a lot of people will because I think it's pretty damn accurate. What I will say is though, for all of the bad that this film did, it did give me a night of entertainment. If we want to talk about the good stuff, like
if you want to call this that, sure.
It was hilarious, but I enjoyed my night. Whereas when I went to see The Last Jedi, the film that came before this one, I checked my phone quite a bit, which is something I really never do in the theaters because if I'm paying for something, I want to get the most out of it and make my opinion of it when it's all said and done, as I think you should do. Like, give everything a chance because, like, we've seen J.J. Abrams do great work, so there's no reason just to pigeonhole him into, like, oh, this is gonna suck because that's what the reviews are saying. Like, I don't try to live my life like that. I very much so went in thinking, okay, I have not been impressed with what I've gotten so far, and sure, The Mandalorian really hasn't helped, but that's different than this. Like, these are all individual titles from an expanded universe of Star Wars, so I tried to be very objective. Unfortunately, I did not end up really enjoying the film, but I was entertained, which is more than I can say for the predecessor, on the note of talking about something at least I thought was good from it.
Yeah, so Christian, what I'm going to say is, like, this definitely is not my favorite film of all time, but strangely enough, if I had to pick one of the three Star Wars movies in this latest trilogy, this is probably going to be the one that's as close to good as I can admit to. Mainly I think all three have really done the same theme, which is, hey, we're going to make a, national treasure, Nicolas Cage type adventure movie where we got to find the latest clue, which always particularly happens to be a map in this case. Like, space is so vast and they haven't been able to coordinate mapping systems. They basically just sort of, do different devices every single planet. And
this time they just rip off the Sith holocrons from Clone Wars, except they don't call them holocrons, even though they're clearly on Morband, even though it's got a new title now. What is it, like Exelgros, Skelegros, something like that?
So it might be left over from the Imperial Senate that, if you map a planet or a location to a planet, like, you can patent that, and you can patent it within a device. And so for some reason, Emperor Palpatine, and now, like, whoever's in control of the First Order, which turns out to be Palpatine, he apparently lets the patent system of these map systems go, and he actually leans into it. Congratulations! Like,
the one thing he did right in his
really
entire
likes
reign.
These confusing map systems. And sorry, you should have stopped me on my side rant.
No, it's fine.
Dude. This is the most interest I've had in this era of Star Wars, like, in a long time.
But I think all three of these movies attempt the same thing, and that's it's an adventure. They set up the story in the first 10 minutes, then we follow an adventure, and then they wrap up the storyline. And
with the exception of, I would say, last one, The Last Jedi, because at that one...
No, The Last Jedi did the same thing, because because they had a space battle in the beginning, and then they went to the casino, and they did all this stuff. Right. And then that movie ended with the kid, right? The janitor in the stables looking up to the sky. And I'm surprised that never got brought back here at all.
I understand completely why they never brought it back, because JJ was on a mission here to fucking, whether it was his directive or somebody else, he was on a mission to fucking just say, oh, yeah, anything that happened in that last movie, fuck that shit, out the window. Within explain away the first 20 minutes of fast forward exposition. Like, that's the one thing I'll say. This is the first time, like, I've seen a lot of bad exposition over the last 3 years in terms of just explaining away everything the movie's going to be about within the first 10 to 20 minutes. But this movie gave me something completely new. It gave me exposition on fast forward, where they're delivering the exposition, and I know it's shitty, contrived studio writing, but it's being delivered at me so fast that even I can't comprehend it. That is a first for me.
Yeah, I had to check while we were setting up the podcast here. I was on my phone for a second. I had to check IMDb because I knew Lindelof or Hughes wasn't attached to this property.
None of them were.
But I just had to check because of the amount of unanswered questions and things that were set up from the first two movies. I just thought, I made this joke when The Force Awakens first came out. Maybe everyone just ends up on the Lost Island, and this is just J.J. Abrams saying, hey guys, like, don't take life too seriously. Like, I'm fucking you guys with every movie I make. You're all idiots, and, focus on things that matter, like the climate. But, I mean, I really was shocked at the amount of holes that were in a movie that is produced by a company that has unlimited resources. If that was intentional, it didn't resonate with me.
Well, it goes back to what their intention is, and I think it's to have that adventure and have a funny scene here, a dramatic scene there, and take us on this emotional roller coaster. But I think it falls flat when there's not characters that you actually enjoy watching. Rey is sort of, she's wearing this boxing outfit for the entire thing, and I guess that's Jedi garb. But
What's
I thought
the same stuff she's worn for the first two movies?
Jedi
but I know what
garb?
you mean. Like,
but
it wasn't
she
as
puts a
intricate.
hood on, right? And I thought, Sylvester Stallone was going to come up and be like,
okay,
hey, I got you, kid. Throw a left hook, throw this.
Yeah.
I really thought there was going to be a training montage, which I guess there sort of was, but
kind of got that.
I really thought Luke's spirit was going to show up. And, for the most part, I really thought it was going to be hitting the weight bags, and she was going to get into fighting shape towards the end there. So the adventure is sort of falls flat for me. And, I kind of remembered this movie that came out in 1984 called Romancing the Stone. Have either of you seen it?
I've heard of that.
I've not
seen it, but I've heard of it. Early, if I'm not mistaken, Robert Zemeckis, right?
Yeah, it's Robert Zemeckis.
With Michael Douglas and Kathleen Turner, if I'm not mistaken, and Danny DeVito. Okay.
Yeah,
Trivia God.
So
hey, man, I'm good. It's what I do.
Kathleen Turner, she plays a romance novelist. She goes down to Colombia. She falls into some, underhanded black market stuff, and Michael Douglas is there as an adventurer to sort of help her out. And I think there's real characters in that film. You feel that she's a romance novelist that sort of sits in her house writing these novels, doesn't really know how the real world works, but has a good sense of writing it for the novels. And then she actually meets one of her novel hunks, and she ends up falling in love. And it's how they kind of butt heads. They're from two different worlds, and by the end of the movie, they sort of reconcile their relationship. And that's actually a pretty decent romance. Here you have Adam Driver and
Daisy Ridley.
Daisy Ridley, and what the hell is with that romance?
I would like to add for all the stars who've used Star Wars to push their careers in further directions. Daisy Ridley, again, I can't fault her too much because Force Awakens was the first movie she did. Forget big budget movie, just movie she did. I think she'd only been in plays and shorts before this. And the most notable movie she did outside of these three core Star Wars movies was Kenneth Branagh's 2017 hit Murder on the Orient Express. Pat, continue.
I'm not gonna argue against any actor taking a blockbuster paycheck. I think it's good for them to get their faces on many screens as possible and get fans, because that's what's going to drive them to be in more projects.
Drive puns.
Yeah. So for the most part, I will say that the two main characters, Kylo Ren and Rey, are supposed to be sort of have this intense, intimate bond, and not for a moment in this movie do I believe it's there. And
no, I never believed it.
I'm just
from any of the three films.
Why? Because of all the things this movie is expecting you to forget and that didn't happen, and expect you to not think that didn't happen in Last Jedi. That's a one fucking thing they are trying to carry over. Is weirdly enough, again, one of my favorite elements of that movie is what everyone said they wanted and that they didn't end up getting is the Rey Kylo Ren romance, which, say what you will about that movie, that I thought was one of the most very well the one of the best built up things in that movie. That's what I will say.
What I will say about their relationship is that, I mean, I think you could have had something actually really compelling with Finn and Rey had they chose to explore that, and had they given him, Finn being him, the chance to actually tell her how he felt, because they've been through a lot together. We saw those characters, whether it was cliche or we've seen that before, just like, we put a Star Wars skin on it. Regardless, we at least saw those two characters go through a narrative arc together and a narrative structure together. Whereas Kylo Ren and Rey, they fought once in the snow in Force Awakens, and then they were doing this weird like telekinetic force power thing throughout the
Skype
two.
calling, teasing each other.
And so, but there really wasn't like a narrative arc there. So I think like, not saying it would have been a good employment of like Rey having a love interest, but if she has to because she's like the lead girl in the movie or whatever, I mean, that just seems to be my thought. Like that would have been at least been a little more compelling. And then like one quick little side note before we, stray too far away. The one thing I do respect and applaud Star Wars for always doing is giving young actors who are relatively new and fresh a chance to springboard and become a character. I think if this series would have been better written, and if this series would have had more TLC and less drama going on between each movie, and
had a plan,
like how Mark Hamill and for better or for worse, like Hayden Christensen sort of are like legendary, like they're embedded into like Luke Skywalker and Anakin. I think that these characters sort of had a chance, and I think it's smart to bring a no-name character, because if this series was better received, Daisy Ridley could have went down as like Rey from Star Wars. So we'll see if that happens now. But that's why I like the approach of bringing. I think it will for the younger generation. Like when we walked out of the theater, I heard the little kid who was probably like 11 tell his dad like that was awesome, and then I heard his dad say to, I think his uncle or whatever friend was there with him, that was terrible. So I think that just shows like where this is going to end up eventually going. But I mean, back to like the narrative structure of it, yeah, I think like it felt forced, Kylo and Rey. But I think if it was Finn and her, or at least like anyone else who she had interaction with, maybe there could have been something there.
Again, it just comes down to ultimately this movie's ultimate problem, which is that this movie has no focus. This movie is literally just like, okay, what's the next thing we can introduce in order to propel the plot forward? And just keep introducing shit and piling it on top of it and on top of it and on top of it until we literally have a shit sandwich that is literally topped off with a cherry on top. That is something that is literally given away within the first, they don't even wait for the movie to start. They literally just give it away in the opening crawl because they're like, fuck it. We gave it away. We gave away the biggest twist of our movie. It's Celebration. Everybody knows this is going to happen, which is, yeah, Palpatine's the big bad and that ultimate, and he's back, and he's been orchestrating everything with literally little to no explanation because, again, it's on rush exposition. Like, I swear to God, I'm getting like 40 to like an hour's worth of information within 20 minutes. It's like, oh, we just see Kylo Ren walk past this tank of like genetically engineered Snokes.
Yeah, that was an answer. That was like why I was like, I made the Lindelof Hughes joke in reference to things like that. Yeah. Pat, you got something?
I just want to say that I think a lot of this third movie here, The Rise of Skywalker, they kind of introduce it all in this movie. And when you set off to do a trilogy, you have 3 movies to do setups and payoffs, and they don't do that.
I agree. I could agree with that. I could really agree with that.
Factors into the ultimate problem of Kathleen Kennedy, where Kathleen Kennedy never had, and would never, which again, just in terms of your job as a producer, like as the head of a creative studio, right? It's her entire thing is to get one overall story, right? That's the point of a trilogy, right? Or each part of the subsequent 3 movies, whatever the case, is supposed to be beginning, middle, and end of one overall cohesive story, right? That's always been the beauty of trilogies, just in terms of filmmaking in general, right? Is the fact of the trilogy and the act of the 3 movies mirrors the 3-act structure in itself, Build up, climax, and payoff, just in terms of basic story structure. And then, no, what's her overall plan? Oh, JJ's hot, and he loves Star Wars. Get him on there. Ryan Johnson, he's hot. Get him on there. And then we're going to introduce these spin-offs along the way. Oh, look at Colin Trevorrow. He just had a $1 billion hit. Let's get him on there. You know? That works. He does a flop? Oh, fuck it. Just get JJ back.
Yeah, I think the main thing is, we have to look at it from the intellectual property point of view, and it's $4 billion, I think, was what Disney paid, George Lucas to buy this series. Yeah. And for the most part, they have to sort of milk it. They have to get the big stars to do it. And I think, they're business-wise, I'll have to agree with their strategy. They're making money. So we can't, as film, goers, basically complain that much about what their strategy is. The only way that we can vote is by stop watching the stuff, which may or may not be warranted depending on how you feel. One of the things I think about this movie is that Kylo and Rey basically having these talks with each other and really being like a new definition of the Force. And getting new skills and really elevating what it is to be a Sith or a Jedi. I thought they could really have played with that a lot more. Like, hey, it's like you have this old war between Sith and Jedi, and then you have these two young people that are now, bonded in such a weird genealogy way that they're somehow like a corner of the Force that we've never seen before. And
so here,
and that's pretty cool that they introduced this, but introduce it in The Force Awakens. That's what should have awakened.
Yes, I agree.
But they didn't show us that.
Because like I was trying to make the point of with the whole like narrative arc, how I felt like it didn't really have an impact because it never really began with Rey and Kylo. I think this might better help solidify my first point. If you look at, I like what they did with their powers. I like how she has now Force Heal, which was something that was always in the extended comic book universe. I'm a huge Star Wars guy. I've read a bunch of Dark Horse comics before Disney uncanonized them, and they explored a lot of those things that people really loved in the fanfare. That the fan fiction, if you will, like the uncanonized that was originally canon Star Wars comics, like explored. So the pushing the Force to a new level was great, and I liked seeing that. But the thing is, yes, she got the blessing of Yoda and Luke and all those other Jedi with voiceover, which is great. So I guess maybe that's like their loose way of justifying that, like, oh wow, like they are the strongest Jedi. But to be honest with you, like they never felt stronger than Yoda. They never felt stronger than Obi-Wan. They never felt stronger than Luke. Like I did not, like, how in Rocky you watch him train and train and train. So when he finally wins at the end of every movie, he earned it. I never felt like they earned it. It just felt like they were just forcing it in the last 15 minutes because you need a final battle that's going to wow moviegoers.
And another thing to bounce off your point is that you're right. The problem is that all of that interesting stuff with exploring the Force and exploring new things that we've never seen before, that, the missed opportunities of this movie were already covered in the fucking last movie. So, yeah. So that's another reason why they're not new and interesting, because we already saw that. The Force Skype calls, we already saw that. When it was new and interesting in the last movie. When it was the only fucking interesting part about the last goddamn movie, which I'll still admit was a convoluted, confusing mess.
We hadn't seen Force Heal until Mandalorian last week, but yeah, we Force Heal was like the only new thing, but yeah, but I mean,
Well, I think the Force calls and stuff like that, it wasn't really something major. It kind of felt like it was, oh, we got to tell this story about these two and have them communicate, so let's just make this up. It wasn't like a reveal to the audience that this is a new dynamic of the Force. And
right, but in a way that like also like makes it a new dynamic of the Force. Because the whole thing is that the Force was never a situation of where like they expressly had like rules for it. The whole thing was that the Force was kind of just like this established thing that could always be expanded upon. There were never necessarily any rules for it.
We're talking about movies and stakes, and like there's no stake to the Force. Like they just tap into it, they use it, and that's great. But if you're in a movie trilogy and, the whole thing is going to come down to a battle of the Force, like there should be stakes from the very beginning. It shouldn't just be like there and disposable when you need it. I think, you need to really say like these two characters are tapping into a new section of the Force that no one's ever seen, even Palpatine. And I think for the most part, they didn't do that. They didn't achieve that.
You're right.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that, like you said, and I really like the way you put it, like, and you both you guys really, they jam-packed, this is where the trilogy really did start. I mean, before all of this, you could have had in the opening crawl.
I felt like this was a Revenge of the Sith situation where, well, no, I can't even say that because at the very least, Revenge of the Sith, even though it's the best of the prequels, and even though kind of you could only watch that movie, get the whole origin of Darth Vader in that movie, even the first two, Phantom Menace and Attack of the Clones, still add more context to that movie than either of the predecessors of this movie added to this movie. Like, I felt like you could watch this movie in and of itself, and again, whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, you don't need any of the previous movies as context because this movie just fucking explains everything that happened in it.
I think that this movie, had it been the first of the new trilogy, actually has a lot of interesting angles to explore and build upon. Like, I'm kind of tired of every planet being blown up and now every single ship has like a death missile on it. Okay, like, can we stop with that like motif and trend? Like, let's see someone actually rebuild the galaxy and actually like repair the damaged empire and try to restore order. Let's stop talking about it for 9 movies.
Yeah.
So
I just want to cut in. I think it's weird because with this trilogy, maybe my timing's off. Maybe they didn't really describe it in the films. I'm not someone that goes in and tries to read any of the books, the comics. Pretty much I read the books, or I watch the movies. Mm-hmm. And for the most part, it's like, Return of the Jedi happens, everyone's happy, and then suddenly, what is it, like 15 years later, we're back to destroying the galaxy again. Nothing has really changed. Like, what you kind of undercut the original trilogy. It's like, oh yeah, we destroyed the Death Star twice,
3 times if you count Force Awakens.
Yeah, but now we're in this movie, The Rise of Skywalker, we got to return to the Death Star again and have a cool ocean battle with lightsabers and all this stuff on the Death Star, and it's like, this series cannot get away from itself of, oh, the Death Star was a big thing, let's go back to it. Yeah. Oh, destroying planets, that was a big thing, let's go back to it. Yoda, it was a big thing, let's go back to it. Like, to me, this is supposed to be a vast galaxy, and it feels like, I'm trapped in the room with Brie Larson.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no,
why Brie Larson of all people?
Wasn't she in the movie?
No.
The Room?
No. Oh, Room. Oh, yeah. Yeah, she was.
Interesting.
Dom dismissed my joke.
I completely missed that joke.
That's
another one. I'm going to roll here with just missing jokes.
I'm telling movie jokes for Dom. And
I don't even get it. I'm the movie nerd. I don't even get movie jokes.
Well, so, to that point, to bring it in a little further, I was honestly trying to take less of like, let's just go in there, for lack of a better word, and just shit all over this thing, because there was effort put into this. I just think like what I'm finding in this conversation is it was put in the wrong places. So with that being said, another thing I want to jump to, because I feel like we sort of exhausted that point, and I think it's okay to move on to this. I feel like when they couldn't figure out a better way to send off a character or to end their narrative arc, they kind of just, in typical J.J. Abrams fashion, and not this exact thing, but the stylistic approach, they had the characters sort of just fade away, and now they're into the ether.
I don't know. Is that a J.J. Abrams thing or a Star Wars thing?
It reminded me of the ending of Lost that was so divisive and so controversial, how they didn't really explain everything and they all just boarded.
They did.
They just boarded the vessel in the church to go to heaven at the end, and that was never, people were upset about that. There's a lot of loose ends in Lost, and there's a lot of loose ends in this trilogy, in my opinion. And so how do we feel about that? Them just, wisping away the people who they, I think, couldn't write more about.
Well, I mean, if we're talking about one,
that's how I interpreted it.
If we're talking about one character just fading away at the end, I don't necessarily have a problem with it, with the actual act itself, because the act itself we've seen in Star Wars 1 billion times before. My problem is with how it's carried out. That's my problem with it.
Okay, what do you mean? Elaborate on that.
Well, like, so Kylo Ren, first off, again, he gets thrown into the pit by Palpatine and climbs out magically because it's like, oh, I'm not going to do what happened to my dad because I wasn't stabbed by a lightsaber. And I can climb out of a magical pit of Sith Force lightning. And he climbs out and he gets Rey, who's clearly dead.
I must say that the title, Rise of Skywalker, would not have worked.
You know what? You're right. You're right. You're 1,000% right.
Oh my God.
You can't. So the Skywalker
Good catch.
has to sacrifice, the last of the Skywalkers has to sacrifice himself to restore the last of the Palpatines, where he takes Rey Palpatine in his like, who is clearly dead after her life force has been absorbed by her grandfather, and takes her in his hands and like he hugs her, and then like he just lets her sit there, and then he like he puts his hand on his stomach like Alan Rickman to Linda Fiorentino, fucking Dogma style. Like I thought for a second he was trying to like put a baby in her stomach, like magically.
I agree with that.
Okay. At the very least, you saw that. At the very least, you saw that.
Yeah, I was about to lean over to either Christian or Dom and just be like, and that's how Jesus was.
And that's how Jesus was born. Yes.
Okay.
See?
Yeah, it was pretty symbolic of that type
exactly.
of stuff.
And then next thing you know, she's alive. And they're hugging, and then they kiss, and she calls him Ben, and then he's dead. I'm like, oh, okay, wow, I'm so shocked, he's dead.
Yeah.
And then he fades into the ether. So like so many before him.
Yeah,
I'm like,
but
fuck you, movie.
You know,
fuck you.
Luke Skywalker in The Last Jedi faded away for seemingly no reason either. I think that's
But at the very least, there was an explanation that made sense.
And that's
at the very least. That wasn't just for bullshit. Oh, I love you, even though there's no setup for this at all.
But that's the point I'm trying to make. Like, it all feels like it fell short, and there was sort of like a realization to me from like, if I was a creator, I would be embarrassed to put this out. And so like it kind of felt like every time someone faded away into like the ether, the Force, right? Because everyone knows in Star Wars you go back into the Force. It kind of just felt like, ooh, excuse for bad writing number 5, number 6 in the film.
More like number fucking 35.
I think, one of the things I would like to bring up is, my dad is totally into Turner Classic Movies. And every once in a while when I'm hanging around the house and, I go down, to the room that he's in, and I like grab a beer and I hang out with him and I watch a couple Turner Classic Movies. There's these old like adventure movies, right? And, these, the whole Star Wars trilogy here, I feel like comes from like this old school, adventure style like film that I've seen countless nameless films on TCM. And it's like, it comes from a tradition, and I mentioned National Treasure. I think Romancing the Stone. I thought
Indiana Jones a little bit.
Indiana
Jones.
That would have been co-written by George Lucas.
And I know I reference Indiana Jones a lot in this podcast, but a lot of movies are sort of taking that form. Now back to Pat, but I just...
So it's like, this comes from a tradition, and I feel like, they're really like narrowly focused on like what makes that genre what it is, and then they write the scripts. And so I think they stick way too close to the formula that's been around for decades. And, I think they're not bringing anything new to the table. Now, after that point, I also want to bring up the fact that, and I think Dom might actually get upset at me on this one, but Ready Player One is an adventure film as well.
I mean, I can't disagree with you. That's a factually accurate statement.
I actually think that's a better adventure film, mainly because
it makes more sense.
Virtual reality, augmented reality, video games, social media, and online personalities. All that stuff is infecting our daily lives. It's on our phone. It's on our computer. It's on everything. That
naturally makes it more like socially relevant.
Yeah, so it's more relevant to us, like this world, this digital world that has this pretty much very similar Star Wars type adventure. But when you go to Star Wars, like... when's the last time that you brought up, NASA articles on your phone, or SpaceX, or, any of those other competitors of SpaceX? I'm sure there are, tons of people out there reading that every day. I read it every once in a while. But I don't think, we sit around the water cooler talking about space the way we used to. So I think...
kind of lost a little bit of its novelty.
Yeah, so I think I think having big space operas, if it's not saying anything interesting, it just happens to be an adventure in space. It might not be for you. If it has like something to say, and has
like Ad Astra.
Yeah, well, Ad Astra was really good. I've heard some reviews where it compared it to the journey that's taken in Apocalypse Now. which I've come to kind of come to that conclusion that seems pretty valid. But that is also a very like you're going to the center of a guy's mind and you're going further and further out into
it feels like a travel
space.
through the human psyche itself in a way.
Exactly. So, that even though every single audience member in that theater when I watched it was yawning and thought it was pretty boring, that actually had a psychological nature to it that as a viewer you can get behind and really start thinking. There was an intellectual discourse going on in that theater.
And therein lies the problem, because most audience members that just want to go to a movie like this and be entertained do not want to even consider the word think. They want to sit back, let their brain just be spilled open and just be entertained by the visual nauseum.
Dom, maybe I don't want to, I don't have to think in every movie. But it would be great that's a cute young couple that went through a big hardship. I want to identify with people. I just don't want characters that are best friends and give hugs at the end of the movie and high fives because they made it through the adventure. I actually want things on the line that are not just
actual stakes, actual tension, actual interesting characters, actual something that you can get behind that doesn't feel force-fed to you, something that you feel like you've seen a million times
This
before.
is the worst galaxy ever created in storytelling.
Yep.
Because the only thing that happens is planets blow up and people are trying to stop that from happening. Man, that's kind of draconian. But at least you have, hugs and friendship.
So here's
friendship, love, unity, the rebellion, good versus evil, traditionality.
Here's what I kind of just got, sort of being like a fly on the wall between your guys' little interaction right there. Basically, to me, it seems like, and you're right, like good movies make you think and they resonate and they go down in history because of that. And I think that like the original Star Wars was certainly situational. It was like, a little bit after the space race and people were a little more infatuated with that at that point in time. So you're right. And I think that was actually a really smart way to sort of draw a comparison as to why maybe if this movie came out in the 70s when they originally did, people wouldn't have been laughing in the theaters, but when the wow moments happen, you would have heard like the typical generic movie ahs and oohs and things that like are tropes now when like you see movies in movies, audiences being super into a film. And I think what Dom is trying to say is also true, but to me what I got from that is there are two types of viewers, obviously, but I think it's important to explain, right? There's people like us who are obviously critiquing it right now for a podcast, so we want to dive in more because we enjoy this stuff. We like dissecting it, and we like to find something more from a film, but like someone like my mom or dad, right? Like, why is Rocky a movie that they'll always reference and they'll always talk about, even though they could honestly care less about the shot design or the wardrobe? It's because even though they didn't go to see that movie to think, and they didn't probably want to think, it still is years later making them think about that film. Something in that writing, something in that production is resonating with them and keeps coming back to them. And I just don't think that these movies have that like the original trilogy did. And I think that is sort of subconsciously, in a way, maybe a reason why I know the reason why it's falling short for me now, sort of getting that from you guys, because I wanted it to be everything that it was that I grew up loving, the original trilogy, of course, and I don't think it has that nature to make me think about it when I'm not thinking.
And that ultimately is what it comes down to, is this was never going to be the original trilogy that people wanted. This was never going to be that. It's like you've said time and time again, Disney literally just wanted this to fold out as another one of their many products that were going to make them even more billions of dollars as they already had. But I actually think that it's an interesting point, you bringing that up, is like, because it goes back to the simplicity of movies and what made the original Star Wars stick out. It was not because it was this grand space opera that was continuing all these different ideals. It was because it brought it back to what it is people like your parents, like my parents, like your parents, I would assume, Pat, like what all of people used to go to the movies for, which is ultimately not what the movies are anymore, which is they went because everyone else was doing it at the time, because they didn't have much else going for them, and because it made such an impact on them that they are still thinking about it years later.
Well, Dom, very likely that most of our parents went there because it was a good makeout spot.
That too, but
the stories just happened to be there.
The stories just happened to be there.
We just uncovered our origin stories.
Movies used to be the fly on the wall that we now have occupied. But yeah, so that's ultimately what it comes down to me, is that at the end of the day, people, it goes back to the original like intent, if you can even call it that, because I don't think there is an original intent for cinema. If you want to break that down to it, it's like
creative expression, right?
What was George Méliès trying to do when he was making a trip to the moon? Was he trying to think about the ultimate cultural impact of his film upon the rest of the film? No, he was trying to fucking continue what he loved doing, which was having a bunch of fun, dressing up in a bunch of crazy costumes, making a bunch of special effects in front of cameras, which is ultimately, at the end of the day, what every filmmaker should be trying to do. You know, and the fact that they're doing it in their own unique way is what propels the movement forward. But because we have Disney controlling so much of everything,
I think, you know, you brought up Méliès, and I think what he was trying to do, right? He was a magician. You know, it was like a family business with his wife, and for the most part, they kind of sold that business. They had a theater, and that's how they made their money. And then they built a studio, and they started making films. And then they continue to make money. And those films that Méliès made were really like optimistic and upbeat. And then the World War happened, and that's when really society took a more pessimistic turn, and his kind of goofy nature in those films sort of like petered out. So I think, you know, when you say Méliès, you know, what does he do this for? You know, it is creative expression, but it's also like he understood that, you know, no one was doing this, that he could do it, and, you know, he could have a pretty decent business doing it. And so I think there's a little entrepreneur, you know, in the creative field, and I think he tapped into it.
And I think there has to be.
I think that's ultimately the thing that people always seem to forget when they think of what cinema is. You know, if we're gonna term drop that, is that you're right. There is a certain level of entrepreneurship. Yeah, it comes from creativity, and yeah, it comes from understanding ideals, but there is definitely that little bit of entrepreneurship and drive. And I feel like that's ultimately something that's being lost with Disney, is Disney, because they are ultimately, for lack of a better word, the evil empire. They're trying to take the entrepreneurship and the fun and out of what it is that makes film special.
Well, you know, I think what Hollywood in general is doing, look at X-Men, right? You know, typically those movies started off as sort of a collective, you know, group casting, you know, good versus evil, mutants and all that jazz. But then Logan comes out. And, you know, you take the mutants out of that story and you make it a regular script, you know, you have a pretty dark, you know, older gentleman trying to protect a younger person.
It's Man on Fire.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. It's a Denzel Washington movie, or Steven Seagal, if you want to go further back to that, you know, genre. So more or less, like it's you're taking other genres and you're sort of now plucking these you know, particular IP characters into them, and so you're showing us you know, a new, you know, really a new take on your intellectual property, right? So instead of just being a superhero movie, you know, it's now an action, you know, protect the child. I think like Jason Statham has done movies like this where he's got to protect, you know,
every Transporter movie ever made.
Yeah, exactly. So like, for the most part, you know, I think, you know, you buy the intellectual property and then you start making movies in different genres. And
that's something that Star Wars has not done at all, because they've had the opportunity many times over to explore different directions and truly prove how this galaxy is something different. You know, it's funny because I'm in this Facebook group, and one of the people actually brought up a point that I've thought of previously, is just where Star Wars missed a golden opportunity where, yeah, so they, in a very dumb move, in my opinion, they scrapped all the original comics, claimed that was legend material, and they basically started their own canon that was launched out of the new Clone Wars and later Rebels saga, you know, with all those comics that launched from that era. And they could have made many different TV shows there, but they didn't. and they didn't expand the universe, and they didn't make it feel larger. So now, as a result, when you have these new movies without the previous generation, it's not even a situation of where, like nostalgia was always kind of going to be a part of Disney's game, but now it's a situation of where I don't even think they could have made these work without nostalgia, to the point where literally when you have one movie that threatens to deviate from that even a little bit, you got people outcrying it, you know? So Disney, as, you know, the evil empire, missed their opportunity to truly expand on those genres and give us something different and get audiences used to the idea of something different in Star Wars. So now, as a result, we're in this kind of bastardized reverse situation where we're giving the people exactly what they want, and it's fucking awful.
Yeah, well, I think the diehards, you know, will probably, you know, get their fill of the pudding. And, you know, but you can only eat so much dessert, you know. So I think eventually they'll kind of tune out, and then to keep the franchise alive, you can, you know, repackage it and find new audiences. You know, it's like Detective Pikachu, right? You're taking Pokemon, which is a kid series, and, you know, you're making a pretty damn good, you know, detective story.
Yeah, I enjoyed it.
I'm surprised that, you know, I went there for nostalgia because Pokemon kind of landed exactly at the time.
I'm so shocked that I enjoyed that movie as much as I did.
It had some staying power.
So, like, I had to see it. You know, it's like Maltese Falcon, Veronica Mars, like all these other kind of detective stories are things that I'm into. And then, you know, I think I was on the tail end of Pokemon, you know, Red and Blue. Like, I was like just right age where that was a fun RPG to play. And so it's like, and also I had a roommate that did some voice acting for some of the Pokemon movies. So
okay,
probably not
That's
this,
pretty cool.
probably not Detective Pikachu.
Yeah, the animated ones.
Some of the animated stuff. So I'm like, okay, you know, why not? You know, I'll give it a try and see what it's about. And, you know, for the most part, I thought it was a tight script. And you're taking Pokemon and you're putting it in a detective, you know, genre. And I think, you know, that works for a lot of these intellectual properties.
Yeah. Well, with that being said, I agree. That movie, say what you will about it. I mean, I wasn't too keen on the performances, and not to make this a Detective Pikachu review, but it at least worked, which is something I can't say about this entire trilogy. I think we're almost.
Are you real quick? Not to interrupt, but are you conflating your feelings for this one movie to the overall trilogy, or?
No, I now have all of the material presented to me, and I can sort of like formulate an opinion on the three movies that I've now seen, considering there's supposed to be a narrative arc that goes from one film to the next to the next.
Emphasis on supposed to be.
And exactly, and closes up an even greater arc of 6 movies prior. And I think it failed to do that. But with that being said, before we sort of like jet out of here and give like all of our closing statements, I do want to have a little fun, because I feel like this sort of became like sort of like a roast fest, and then an even more morbid realization of like
philosophical realization of like what the state of cinema is going to be going forward,
and how unfortunately we're the minority and we're fighting a losing battle.
Yeah.
But let's pick up the morale of the audience a little more right now. I know we're having a good time enjoying this, but there's one last thing that I specifically wrote a note down for that I want to touch with you guys, and it's 2 words, and I wrote them down in all caps, and it is creepy Lando. What do we think about that? Because that was really,
I don't necessarily know if we're talking creepy Lando. I just always thought that was like characteristic of
what
Lando.
An impression to end us on. Reverse cougar. Right?
Make sure you.
It was weird.
Make sure you give Leia my love. Oh, you'll give it to her yourself.
I think what you're saying, Chris, is we found the real Black Panther.
Oh my god!
Right? If we're going with the cougar, right? Does that still work?
I guess so. Yeah. I mean, listen. All I'm saying is that was like the uncle who like is too friendly. You know what I'm talking about? Like, yeah. I didn't like that.
That last sentence is, you know, basically Christian is talking about a young woman. She was part of the clone army, but basically
another Finn, for lack of a better word. It's
another character that was unexplored
in this last movie.
Exactly.
In the middle of this last movie, in a 10-second exposition scene that's completely rushed over.
Yeah, she felt the need to rebel and get out of there and not kill innocent people. And she helps with the big battle, destroying starships and all this stuff. And they all, we get to see everything in the celebration, right? Ewoks, Porgs, I think the Was Up guys from Budweiser were there.
Plush doll commercial.
Yeah, exactly. So like a lot of montage reminiscent of Return of the Jedi. And then they get to this young woman and she's like, what am I going to do? I don't know who I am. I don't whatever. And Lando just like whips his hair around in a very, I think, sultry shot. And he's just like, let's find out. And, I
literally couldn't decide whether that was code for let's bone now or like whether he was actually being sincere. And I think that this effect of I was unsure about that made me even more uncomfortable.
It ruined an even
I think
worse.
The wink really.
The wink solidified
that really clued you in.
And can I tell you something?
If she's at least 30 years younger than him, like at least.
I mean, that was, I guess, that was character. That was just character development. I mean, that was staying true to the character. So they were more like exaggerating him and bringing out who he was, right? Sort of reminding you. But like, that was the only time I felt that we got more from a character in this movie. Like, that was the only character development I really sensed. And it's unfortunate that it came from that moment.
Yeah. Also,
you know what I'm saying?
Also, Chewbacca had eyes for the bar owner in Force Awakens.
But that was actually one of the few things that actually was established.
Oh, was it?
Yeah, she said, "Oh, where's my boyfriend?" when they first ran into her in Force Awakens. So that was established at the very least.
Okay. I guess
man, Wookiees got to get love too.
We're weirdly enough because still, as shitty as these last two movies were, at the very least, I still like Force Awakens. But
I just want to say with Chewbacca, there was one moment where he was sitting at the cargo crates. And legitimately, this is after he was captured and rescued. And I think if no one came up to him and say, "Hey, buddy, we need you," he would have sat there.
I agree.
Final battle
100%. 100%. I agree.
Like
sure,
Chewbacca
he was
was
sulking.
literally tired.
He's old.
Yeah. 250. They even said it.
Yeah, I'm surprised. That was kind of a weird moment. I don't know if you guys picked up on it, but it was like.
I also thought he looked horrible.
Okay, I'm sorry to say, but I think Chewbacca is the only actual story I've gotten in The Last Jedi and this movie.
Maybe C-3PO.
Because
this is the most that they've done with C-3PO.
But you're right.
The
You're
last
totally
6
right.
movies.
Chewbacca is the strongest narrative arc.
Yeah, because Chewbacca had this great story with the Porgs where he just like he lands on this rock. He immediately eats one. One looks sad at him, and so he like starts buddy with them. And then the next shot, he's like perfect friends with them. And that's an arc. Wow. That's an actual character arc.
It is. And then he lost Han Solo. We saw him. We saw him lose and then recover, bounce back from
very
that
quickly to the point where he shot Han's kid in the gut, landed him square there, and that kid somehow.
Wow.
Yeah.
But
everybody
else is having these like
just rinse and repeat.
Missed arcs that just are not paying off the way they should. But
we're literally to the point where Finn, who had the most interesting arc out of everybody in The Force Awakens, is now literally like he's even on rinse and repeat, where they just bring in one of the new characters. It's like, exactly what happened to Finn. We're just gonna explain it though.
Mm-hmm. Yep, I know that John Boyega went to like a fancy art school and was like an amazing theater actor, but I'm sorry, his performance was nothing short of flat for me. I'm too tired to think of a more articulate way to word that, and I also don't want to put him down because, like I said, when we walked out of the theater, if I, as a creator, got the opportunity to work on a blockbuster and make that kind of money and support making my art, I would do it.
Hey, you got his own production company.
I'm not afraid to say that after all that I've said on the record on this podcast, but I still think his performance was flat.
The last thing I sort of, and I guess this can act as like my closing statement.
Yeah, then give us your rating and we'll all go around.
Well, I want to ask you guys, because like we have 9 movies, 3 trilogies, and I really just want to, one by one, each trilogy as they happened, what is your favorite movie, and just like a couple sentences why, starting with the first trilogy. And Dom, I'll throw it to
hold
you.
on. You wanted us to go
out of A New Hope, Empire Strikes Back, and Return of the Jedi, out of those three, what was your favorite?
Empire, no question.
All right. Any reasons?
For me, it's the most narratively compelling. It's got the most going on in terms of all three movies, and I feel like it's got the most intrigue in terms of where Star Wars could have gone at the time. Again, it's a little bit tricky to take apart like the movie out of context. Obviously, today we're doing what we know about it today as opposed to back then. But even still, it's the most narratively to me, it's the most narratively interesting that Star Wars has ever gotten, and that's with Revenge of the Sith and all the prequels.
All right, Christian.
Yeah, for me, I'm going to have to say, and this isn't just because Dominic's friend who thinks I'm not cut out to talk about movies is probably listening right now and already doesn't like what I've said, but I'm just going to say it. You know, nostalgia, I think it's okay to drive your decision in like this sort of conversation. So I'm going to go with Attack of the Clones because I literally wore that movie out, and even watching it as an adult, there's still a magic in it, you know, the set design, the use of technology in that film.
The second trilogy, right?
It's the prequels.
I'm asking trilogy by trilogy.
Oh, trilogy by trilogy. Oh, I thought you meant pick like the best one of them all.
Out of the first three movies to actually, be produced.
Okay, well, let me say my thing about Attack of the Clones, and I'll tell you my first because I already started it.
You take both turns.
So I'm sorry about that. It's late, guys. It's very late.
Just want to make sure you're clear.
It's podcasting after midnight, which is always a no-no, but we're doing it. Anyways, so yeah, Attack of the Clones because that just has a level of nostalgia, and it also put the war in Star Wars, which I've always been looking for. So yeah, Attack of the Clones to me was badass as a little kid, and it's still badass as an adult. A New Hope, man. I mean, that is like, I think that should be studied in film school as if you want to start a trilogy, here is how you set it up. Because I was hooked the second I saw that film. Watched them in order as a kid. Got to go with A New Hope.
All right, I'll say that out of the original trilogy, I think I was really young when I watched these movies. Return of the Jedi, I think, is my favorite one. Not because of the Muppets and all these aliens that are there. It's the introduction of really like this is a galaxy and this has many different species. This has different planets. And I think it really shows Luke coming into control of his powers and really becoming a player. In the galaxy scale. And, that's really shows the tremendous growth. He's really confident in himself. He's wearing the Steve Jobs turtleneck. I think I think that's where
he's working
Steve
out
Jobs
of a garage, fine-tuning his craft.
Yeah, he basically, he started off as a garage Jedi, and then
Uncle Ben's garage.
Now he's in the top of the global world.
And Carbonite. We got Carbonite for the first time in that film, which is pretty badass.
So I think Return of the Jedi is really...
He said Empire.
No, he said Return of the Jedi.
Yeah, Return of the Jedi.
Sorry. I got number 2 and 3 mixed up.
Yeah, Return of the Jedi. You have the bounty hunters and Jabba the Hutt. You
Podcasting after midnight, guys.
Yeah, you have the Ewoks.
The brains all wobbly.
Dance. You just have a lot more expansion into the world, and Luke is really in command. Mm-hmm. And I think that's pretty cool for his character. Going to the next trilogy, right? 1, 2, and 3. I'm all in on the Phantom Menace.
Okay.
I really do think that yes, it's family oriented, but I think it does the adventure film correctly. It introduces Natalie Portman, as this queen, and she has like these politics and all this stuff, and the pod racing was sort of like nice, Fast and Furious type action in space. And ultimately, it has the cool sort of three-way dance at the end of the movie with Darth Maul, Liam Neeson, and Ewan McGregor. And so I think out of all three of those, I think that one just really is pretty solid for me. Attack of the Clones, I think the dialogue is kind of Revenge of the Sith, I think the editing is just too much. It's too fast to stimulate the Jedi thing.
And I think that's ultimately what I like about Revenge of the Sith the most, and why that's my favorite of the prequels. Don't get me wrong, I've come around a lot on Phantom Menace, having watched it recently, and found the first 2/3 like almost sleep-inducing. That lightsaber fight still is like one of the greatest things I've ever seen on cinema. I've even said this. So, fun fact, Phantom Menace is the first Star Wars movie I ever watched, and even going back as far as watching that movie with my grandpa, watching that movie with my grandpa when I was like 5 years old, I still think that lightsaber fight is like between Qui-Gon, Obi-Wan, and Darth Maul is like one of the greatest things ever put to film. But with that being said, Revenge of the Sith, I feel like, is ultimately the encapsulation of both what Lucas was originally intending to do with the trilogy, which I feel like he didn't achieve until that movie, and also just ultimately understanding that the true dichotomy of what Star Wars is, which is light and dark combined to form one, where I think it's the only movie to me that truly does the operatic fall from grace in a way that's believable, with the exception of the dialogue. And I'll give you the editing. It is a little bit fast at points, but still, just like the moment that movie starts, it doesn't stop, and it just keeps getting lower and lower and lower. It's like kind of like a reverse. It's probably like the movie that I would compare the most to it in terms of just the tone that it accomplishes is Nightcrawler, where you just see this guy getting, albeit obviously like a lot more well done, I would say, in Nightcrawler, but where you just see this main character just getting fully more and more so entrenched in just something that he ultimately is not going to be able to escape from. But the difference being obviously that Anakin is a lot less aware of what's going on, which again kind of contributes to what makes him a faulty character. But again, it's, to me, Revenge of the Sith ultimately encapsulates what it is that Lucas was originally intending to show with the origin of Darth Vader, and I think that he successfully achieved that, which is why that's my favorite.
Mm-hmm. So I guess it's up to me to pick from the new.
Yeah, from the last trilogy that we just finished up tonight.
Yes.
What was your favorite film?
The best trilogy yet.
My favorite. I mean, I want to say the one we just watched, but there's at least some solid ground that I can at least like justify like having a good foundation of to go off of in The Force Awakens. So that's why I'm gonna have to pick The Force Awakens, because it wasn't the greatest starting point, but you at least had something to work with, and what we got after that is it's hard to call that better than the other two.
Yeah, you're not going to hear any disagreements from me. Force Awakens is the only one. It's the only one out of these fucking movies that's been compelling and anything resembling consistent. Because at the very least, like, I find that interesting because we all had not only different choices, but we all literally each picked one of each. Where for the original trilogy, we each had one of them. I had Empire, you had New Hope, and you had Return of the Jedi. Prequels, you had Attack of the Clones, you had Phantom Menace, I had Revenge of the Sith. This one, that's how fucking awful just the state of movies is now, where we literally have the same choice. Like I said, if I had to guess, I'm just going off conjecture here, but we literally have the same choice, not based on our own individual taste, but just based on what is the most bearable out of these sacks of shit that Disney has had to sneak past us.
I don't think I would go that far, Dom. But,
I would. I absolutely
for the
would.
most part, I'm going to say that I actually, I don't think out of the new trilogy, I overwhelmingly enjoyed them. I think I'm more on the pessimistic side on all three of them. But I will say that I think The Rise of Skywalker probably was the better movie experience for me. The theater that we had was just really on the same wavelength.
For once.
I also think that like there was those like the nuggets of story that I look for and hope were there. I just don't think they were properly set up. I don't think they were properly paid off. So
the whole movie felt like it was on fast forward.
Yeah, so I felt like if things just came together a little bit differently, and maybe this comes to the rush nature of making blockbusters and striking while the iron's hot. Disney trying to make their money back on this investment. Maybe in a different world, these movies could have came to a climactic end that would have been really fantastic. And really, when Rey is asked, for the 50th time in this trilogy, like, hey, who are you? And she says, Rey Skywalker. You would really believe that shoe being dropped and hit the loud, Star Wars music, credits. Everyone would have been cheering. But that moment of everyone cheering in the theater was everyone like laughing like what the fuck just happened, because they didn't earn that.
And that there is the legacy of Disney Star Wars. Everyone laughing in their stupid faces with how much they didn't give a shit about
they're laughing
our
To
intelligence.
the bank.
They're laughing to the bank for sure. But at least it makes me happy. I hope that going forward, although I know there won't be, but I hope there could be a change. Now, with that being said, we do have to jet out of here. Pat, I want you to start us off. Out of 5 stars, what would you give this film?
I think this comes down. My rating is going to solely come down to the last time I was on the podcast with Black Christmas. I said Black Christmas was a 2. I think I would be willing to sit through Rise of Skywalker one more time. So I'll give it a 2.5.
Okay, and I was going to give it a 2.5 as well. I'm going to go see it one more time. I want to see it with a different theater to see how that sort of... Because our theater, we've brought it up a lot, our group really did sort of impact. It seems to be the way that all of us perceived it. Not to an extremity, but it certainly had an impact, whereas most times it doesn't really for me as a film watcher. So with that being said, Dom, what was your star rating for Rise of Skywalker?
The first time I watched Force Awakens, I wanted to see it as many times in theater as I possibly could, just for sheer fact of I wanted to get that rush of endorphins that I got from the first time I saw it. Because the first times I saw Force Awakens, I'll say that for taking out all of the afterthoughts for me about the movie itself, just that theater experience and that rush that I got, I don't think any theater experience has quite equaled that type of feeling that I got the first time I saw Force Awakens in theaters. That was why I saw that movie 4 times in theaters. With Last Jedi, I wanted to see that movie a second time in theaters, just to be sure that I was feeling just as confused and at the second time around as I was the first time around, where I'm like, I legitimately have no idea what the fuck I just saw, and I just need to get like a clear grasp of it in order to make sure that I'm not insane and that I didn't miss anything. And so that's why I saw that movie twice in theaters. With this movie, I've seen this movie once in theaters, and if I never see it again, like in general, forget theaters, online, with my family, whatever. If I never see this movie again, I will not have missed anything. So for that, I give this movie 1 out of 5 stars. And that's me being generous.
And with that being said, Dom, how do we like to end this show?
We should talk about getting milk, just like Luke Skywalker did in The Last Jedi.
Hey, I watched Luke Skywalker getting milk any day over this fucking steaming pile. Watch more fucking movies, just not from fucking Disney, because fuck Disney.
Yeah.
Fucking wasted our goddamn times with this fucking bullshit trilogy.
Yeah, you guys
I
know.
Call it that.
You guys know where to find us. We're all over the interwebs. We say it all the time. Links in the description. I think we're all in a little bit of a bitter mood, so we got to get out of here.
Yeah, Dom, where can people go to hear you complain about Disney?
Which is funny because I'm not even the one that usually complains about Disney most of the time, but Chris, do the plugs.
It's at Talkin TV Podcast. TALKIN, no G. Just anywhere. At Talkin TV Podcast. I'm Christian Ivanko. That is my co-host, Dominic Rizzi, a.k.a. the movie nerd.
I'm just the movie nerd tonight, and fuck Disney.
Just the movie nerd tonight.
This one. Fuck Disney.
And Pat is on Instagram, as well as other places.
I know it this time. At Patrick W. Huber.
At Patrick W.
On
Huber.
Instagram.
Pat, give us a fuck movies to wrap this one out. Or watch more movies.
I'll just say movies, right? Because I have to censor myself.
Well, it's watch more movies. Dom adds the curse. He goes to watch more fucking movies, but you can just tell the audience, watch more movies to sign this off.
Ladies and gentlemen, watch more movies.